So now we're going to break down Missouri's legislative branch, which we also call the General Assembly, and you'll hear that term and need to know that for tests. Missouri's Congress is called the General Assembly. And this is a reference to, if you remember at the beginning of the year, ancient Greece called the body of men and citizens that voted on issues the assembly, the Great Assembly. And we call it the General Assembly in Missouri. It is made up of two houses, just like the federal government in that sense. And there's a lot of similarities with the legislative branch of the federal government. You can see them in our Capitol. I believe it's one of the most uniquely designed capitals that really represents and looks very similar to the federal Capitol. It's really pretty. The Senate, now this is where the differences come in. The Senate has 34 seats, and each senator represents 174,000 constituents. They have term limits of 8 years. So they, unlike American senators who could be reelected and have unlimited term, there are no term limits on a senator in America. We do have term limits in Missouri of 8 years. Also, another big difference between Missouri senators and federal senators, or state senators, is that they represent a portion of the population, 174,000 people. So that's arguably more democratic, because it's only based on population, just like the House of Representatives, which is what we call the lower house in the General Assembly. And the House of Representatives has 163 seats and they represent 37,000 constituents, and they have term limits of 8 years too. So what is very common is representatives or Congress House members, they will term limit out after 8 years. They will do 2 years 4 times, and then they'll term limit, and then they'll move up to be a senator. And a senator in Missouri can run for 4 years only twice. So that right there, you could do 16 years. You could do 8 as a House of Rep, 8 as a senator, and then you could move to lieutenant governor, governor if you want to do it that way. Or as we know, historically, a lot of people that leave the Senate or the House of Representatives and they build relationships or friends, a lot of times they become what are called lobbyists or lawyers, attorneys that work with representatives to convince them to push certain bills through. And they tend to get paid well, definitely better than House of Representatives or senators. Reps and senators make very low wages, something around what teachers make, if not lower. So it's not a very good paying job. And there's arguments for that either way. If they're doing it for the service of the country in Missouri, maybe they shouldn't be paid well. But the other side is, would you want to have unpaid legislators where maybe they're more susceptible to corruption? Or you have to have money to get into government to even think like this. Like somebody that's retired or has money that they could even be a senator and only make $40,000 a year or so forth. And they don't care about the money because they have to travel too. A lot of them still live in their hometowns and they drive back and forth between Jefferson City and St. Louis to Jefferson City is like a 2-hour drive, and that's very common. I know a Judge Draper, he's a Supreme Court Chief Justice, and I know that he goes back and forth between Jefferson City and St. Louis, and he lives out in Chesterfield. So he's probably got at least an hour and a half, 45-minute drive, and he's going back and forth all week. Now, the Speaker of the House, just like the federal government, is the presiding officer of the House of Representatives. And the President pro tempore is the presiding officer of the Senate. So this is almost exactly the same as the federal government. And of course, you'd be safe to say that lieutenant governors could break ties if there's such thing. We don't really have ties in the Senate because, we could because of the numbers. But it's very similar. It's run like the federal government. And the terms are the same too. Speaker of the House is the highest position in the House of Representatives. And the President pro tempore is the highest in the Senate. And I want you guys to understand that the Lieutenant Governor is the President of the Senate, and it's more of a ceremonial position again. It's not a very powerful job. You want to be elected the President pro tempore by the senators themselves. Much more powerful. So just to be clear, General Assembly is the senators, and here's some of the restrictions. If there's 34 seats, so it is even. There can be a tie. So Lieutenant Governor is the president of the Senate, could break ties for 35 seats. A person must be at least 30 years of age, just like America and the federal government. Qualified Missouris vote for 3 years before election. So they must be a qualified voter for 3 years. So they must have lived for 3 years in Missouri in order to get elected as a senator, a state senator. They must reside in the office of district in which is chosen to represent for 1 year before election. So that's some of the facts about your senators. And they serve 4-year terms, which is unique because in America, senators serve 6 years, but in Missouri, senators only serve 4 years. And you can see the pictures to the right. Those are the Senate districts. And you can see they're pretty balanced. They're much more proportional than if you looked at the United States, where you have really big states that get 2 senators and really tiny states that get 2 senators. But it's pretty balanced. You will see, like around Missouri and Kansas City, there's more Senate districts because, and you can see, and there's our congressional districts and the red lines in St. Louis because we have, just 1.3 million people just in the city and the county alone. That's without St. Charles and Belleville and East St. Louis and all these other places. There's more people around St. Louis. So there's almost 2.9 million people in the St. Louis region, but we have a lot of population in the city and the county. And so it says senators serve 4 years. These are important things to know for the test. Now, a General Assembly, in order for a person to run for the House of Representatives, and there's 163 seats in the House of Reps, and you can see some pictures. There's our Capitol building. It's probably from far enough away you could probably convince me that it is the U.S. Capitol. It looks with the dome, with the Roman dome, and you can see it's inspired by the Republic of Rome, and then the title General Assembly is after the Assembly of Athens. So we're a little bit more direct democracy in Missouri again than there is in the federal government. So here's another example. The representatives, you vote for them directly. It's proportional representation in the state of Missouri. They're 24 years of age, so they can be young. They can be younger than a congressman in the federal government or woman. 25 for your federal government. It's only 24 for Missouri. So 30 for senators for both, though. Qualified, they vote for 2 years before elections. They have to be a registered voter in Missouri. Register a district they live in. They must live there for at least 1 year before they're elected in their district. So if they want to represent Potosi, Missouri, they have to live out in Potosi, Missouri for a year and register to vote before they can actually run there. And they only serve 2 years, and that's easy to remember because that's just like our representatives in the state of Missouri. They serve 2-year terms. So do our representatives in the House, in the General Assembly. So very similar setups. Very important to understand that these setups. Now let's look at the judicial branch of Missouri, and you can see already off the top it's different. First of all, there's only seven members of the Supreme Court, and the Chief Justice is the guy on the right. This is Chief Justice George Draper. I actually met him. His wife married me, Judy Draper. She was a judge as well. She married my wife and I. And you could see he's actually the only African American on the court. And he is the Chief Justice right now. And they actually have a very fair system. And there's a Missouri Supreme Court. It's in Jefferson City, Missouri. You can see the Great Seal of Missouri with the bear, which is the state. You would think it's a state animal. It's actually the mule is our state animal. But we put bears on everything because we have a lot of bears. So let's look over here. And the Chief Justice is typically elected to a 2-year term on a rotating basis by the vote of the Supreme Court judge. So they vote and they rotate Chief Justice. So this is a really interesting system. Unlike the Supreme Court of the United States, where the Chief Justice just stays in charge of the Supreme Court, they rotate. So it's more equitable. And actually, our judicial branch is considered a model for the country. It's supposed to be a pretty well-designed judicial branch. Supreme Court judges must serve a 12-year term and can be reappointed. So they're judges for 12 years. They do not have life terms like they do in America. So they've kind of gone against Alexander Hamilton, the Federalist Papers, these ideas that a judge should be able to stay in there forever. In Missouri, we do not have that system. 12 years is a pretty long term, though. And it's interesting they rotate the Chief Justice, which is going to have a little bit more power on what's on the dockets and have a little bit more power than the other judges on swaying the court one way or another. So George Draper will have some power right now. Now, Two other core concepts we need to talk about are initiatives and referendums. An initiative is a citizen-created bill that would change and amend the Missouri Constitution. And you guys see this? There's our districts, and you can see that these are the federal districts. You see how they look very disproportionate. Like these districts are huge because there's not that many people in southeast Missouri as compared to if you look at St. Louis, District 1 and 2 and 3 are pretty small. And Kansas City's got a very small district as well. And these districts have been cut that way on purpose through gerrymandering. It benefits certain parties and politicians. Now, in order to have an initiative put on a ballot, you must collect over 170,000 signatures from at least 3 different counties. So if you want to change the Missouri Constitution right now, you can set what's called an initiative. Right now, the General Assembly is trying to get rid of initiatives and referendums. They're trying to push legislation, so it's harder to amend the Constitution. But this is a very direct democracy-oriented approach in Missouri. So in Missouri, you'd have to get 170,000 signatures if you want to amend the Constitution of Missouri. And I've seen them all. I've seen them everything from we voted on medical marijuana. There's been people have talked about recreational marijuana. Those are been hot topics that people would vote on. But also there's things like Medicare, making sure all people that qualify get Medicare in Missouri. Very important things are amended in the Constitution. Sometimes they're not as important. It could be how we pay for a tax or something. But you have to read it, and it'll tell you the cost and what the investment's actually going to be. But you would have, so in St. Louis region, it'd be pretty easy. If you got 170,000 signatures, you could go to St. Louis District 1, North City, North County, go down to South County, Jefferson County for 2, or 3, I'm sorry. And then number 2 would be St. Charles and West County and Mid County. You could get signatures from 3 different counties pretty easy. Now, a referendum, on the other end, is a bill that's created by the General Assembly that would change or amend the Missouri Constitution as well. However, this is not proposed and initiated by the people. This is proposed and initiated by the General Assembly. And I'm sure many of you guys are going, well, wait a second. Why would the General Assembly want to propose an amendment to the Constitution? Can't they just do it themselves? And the answer is it takes their responsibility off of them, right? So if you're in Congress, you set up a referendum, you send it back to the voters, and if it goes bad, it doesn't happen on their watch. It doesn't make the senators and the representatives in the General Assembly look bad. It's like, oh, you guys shouldn't have voted for that, but that's one way they take it away, or the governor might want it to go too, where they put it up for the vote for the voters. We don't want to vote on this. And it could be maybe their party, that their dominant party is like, you guys can't pass this. Or it could be, we don't know what this is going to happen, or what will this do to Missouri in 5 years. There's a lot of reasons they would want a referendum. And it could be that they really want democracy and they want more people in Missouri to have a say in this, and they don't feel like they can vote on it. And these are very important differences between Missouri and the federal government. The federal government does not have initiatives or referendums, but you'll see when you guys are voters that you will vote on this stuff all the time. You'll see lots of referendums and lots of initiatives, and you need to pay attention and make sure you don't just judge it by the name, like Patriot Act or vote for love of Missouri bill. You need to read the details, pay attention, and see how much it's going to cost if it has a cost.